Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doctor Who. A great episode with a lot of really interesting things that went down, so let's break it down. I really like they went about this episode in a very interesting thing, because it's what they've done in this episode with the whole thing of, like, obviously, like, hey, we're coming back, and it's like, all right, Doc, we're going to go off. You sure you're going to be all right alone? And the Doc's like, it's fine. And I think that's such a beautiful aspect because the Doctor's like, so what am I going to do? Maybe I should just fast forward to lunchtime when they come back, because the Doctor is that, like, adverse to being alone. I mean, to be fair, the Doctor is rarely alone. That's why I was kind of bringing up last episode. Like, you rarely see the Doctor without companions. Hence why that whole situation with the other Doctor was kind of interesting, why the Doctor was alone, because the Doctor doesn't handle being alone well. I mean, and I'm 100% basing this on from 9 on. Ever since the Doctor's met up with Rose, with the exception of in between companions, the Doctor's rarely ever been alone. And I think that's on purpose, because it's like traveling, it's like, oh yeah, your reasoning for, you stole yourself a TARDIS. Obviously the TARDIS will always say she stole you. But the fact of the matter is, it's a situation of, you're always, it started off so fun, but then you got lonely. And like I said, this is based on everything from 9 on, because I'm not that familiar with the original run in the series, so I don't know if that's something that's resonated with literally every Doctor over the course of the series. But I just thought that was such an interesting thing, like the Doctor, like, being in such a rush to be like, I better get everyone back. And I love that element plays with all the other characters too, because it's like, oh yeah, you have a time machine and stuff like that, but you never get back exactly at a time, because it's something Ryan brings up later on, and I think it's such an interesting point. It's the fact of the matter is, they've grown. Like, while everyone else is kind of like, living their lives, they've changed. So like, we're literally going at life at very different speeds. And it's like, because Ryan, it's like, his best mate being like, oh yeah, man, like, you haven't gotten back to me. It's like been months and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, sorry about that. Yaz missed out on stuff with her sister. Graham is the one that has the least connections, just because, like, well, the only connection he needs is Ryan. So he's kind of okay, but like, Yaz and Ryan's lives are back here. And that's something that comes up a little bit every once in a while with some of the companions. Like, the fact is, the life you're leaving behind, it comes up every once in a while, but it's never always the biggest point. But I feel like now they're making a big point of it. It was a big part of this episode. The fact is, of like, we feel like we're, because it's like, yeah, you have a time machine and stuff like that, but even with the time machine, it's not always going to be an exact science. And so the fact of the matter is, which I know the irony behind saying that, but the fact of the matter is, Yaz ended up missing a dinner. And at first I was wondering, like, what the significance of that was, but we kind of find out about that later on. But I'll kind of weave that this whole conversation in with the rest of the episode, because obviously you have the Doctor going to Aleppo. Side note, like, I could be wrong. I have to look into this. That the actress who plays Tahira, she looks just like the actress who played Hannah and the Norway episode, where it's like, that mirror was actually, like, I forgot what that other dimension was called, but that whole episode, like, I thought she kind of, the blind little girl, I feel like it looks like the same actress. It's probably not. Like I said, they just look similar, maybe. Like I said, I'm probably being stupid, but it was interesting because the whole Aleppo thing, and the Doctor goes there, and I love that the Doctor being like, guys, she's like, oh my God, who am I going to talk about all this interesting stuff with, inform it, because she didn't know how to handle herself being alone, because she's so used to traveling with people, so used to having Graham, Yaz, and Ryan by her side, that the fact of the matter is, it's like, this is awkward, this is weird. And she meets Tahira, and it's like all those creatures had taken. I was wondering, I was like, okay. And then she was reading, she was like, it was nothing. And I was like, no, she's like, that doesn't make any sense. Later on, she runs the hair. It's still registering as nothing. It's something that has never existed, nor will it ever exist across time. So I was like, what the hell does that mean? Then there's the whole situation with Ryan and Yaz having, like, Ryan's best friend is having these nightmares, and it's like, okay, so what's that all about? And the fact is, he was like, all right, like, Ryan, you're not going to really believe me. He's like, dude, I've been through a lot over there. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff. So I'm not joking. I'm not, like, taking a piss out of you with this whole situation. This is like, I'm here. Believe me. Yaz ends up having a nightmare, ends up waking up, see the dude. I was like, because at first we saw he popped up when the Doctor was about to go to Aleppo. Well, before she was about to go to, like, time travel and stuff. So at first I was like, okay, so we see that this dude is connected to nightmares and stuff. So I'm like, at first I was like, is he some kind of form of Sandman or something. But then I start thinking, well, he was there with the doctor. Maybe we didn't get to see it, but maybe the doctor's been asleep this entire time type of situation. That's what I was kind of getting at, but it turns out not to be the case. So the doctor takes Tahira and literally meets up with everyone, which is like, that's so kind of crazy. You taking her from her time to, I mean, to be fair, it's not like the doctor hasn't already kind of showcased this to many other people as well. Some people are fortunate enough to keep their memories of everything they experience. Others not as fortunate. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, okay, trying to figure this whole thing out. I also forgot about that Graham is dealing with this whole situation of in his head. This lady was speaking to him, but like, you know, can you hear me? Come help me and everything. I'm like, okay. After I'm like, okay. So I was like, are we having literally 3 or so different storylines happening at once? I mean, kind of similar to the last episode, but it's like, no, literally everything is connected because they follow the signal or whatever and they land somewhere and they're like, is this a ship or something? And it's like, what is this whole thing about? And then, you know, there's a whole situation of like, all right, they find out that the lady in particular that Graham's been seeing in his head is in a prison. And it was such an interesting prison. It's basically trapped between 2 planets that are colliding. I'm like, that's an interesting prison. But the fact of the matter is, we never found out. I'm wondering why was it Graham specifically? The fact of the matter is, wouldn't it have been easier to give it to everybody? But I guess the whole point was, it needs to kind of, well, you know, I'm skipping around, but I guess they need at least one person to be that thread to pull it along. Like, I guess it's the whole thing of like, oh, it's a puzzle. Don't give them all the pieces. Like, give them one specific piece. Give them different pieces and to see them try to put the puzzle together. Because like I said, literally everyone else had a different kind of piece to this whole situation. So I think that kind of potentially played a role in it. But obviously Zelen, we get introduced to like the nightmare dude because it turns out he's a god. Not really a god, he's a being from a different dimension that's worshipped as a god, because even like the doctor's like, no, you're a myth. And that's so interesting because it turns out, you know, I'm skipping around, he's from a different universe. I'm like, this is the second time we've dealt with things from a different universe. It's like things from a different universe kind of have a bad reputation, with the exception of the literal other universe that they met last season. But so it's just so interesting to me. I'm like, oh, like you're, you know, but regardless, it was interesting kind of getting into everyone's nightmares. At first, the whole situation with Ryan, like he was worried, he's like, what's going on? It's like, oh, the world is burning. He sees his best mate and it's like, he's older and everything. It's like, we were waiting for you. It's like, how long? An entire life. And I'm like, that's Ryan's greatest fear, that like basically he sees that like, hey, I missed out on so much already. Because at first I was like, oh, is that what that's supposed to be? Like his friend was like, it's not a good time. I was like, is it actually like one of his family members passed away recently or something like that? But it's like, no, we'll get to that soon enough. But the fact of the matter is, and I like how they blended this with the Orphan 55. They know what their Earth's future potentially is like. So not having that knowledge and then just that fear of like, I wasn't here to help my friends in some shape or form. I wasn't there for them when they needed me. In particular, my best friend, that obviously being the fear. And I think that's kind of an interesting element, you know, what that means going forward. Like I said, we'll talk about that a little later on. Yaz finds herself on a stretch of like highway or road, and she sees her sister at one end and she sees a cop in the other. I'm like, what is this all about? Then the cop disappears and her sister disappears, and it's like, you're alone. I'm like, what is that? We'll get to that later. I like how they slowly revealed like what that was. Graham's fear is the fact is he wakes up and it's like, oh, it turns out his cancer is back and it's actually worse than ever. And he's only got hours to live, and he sees Grace. My thought was initially like, oh, is this supposed to be a dream where it's like he never actually met Grace, and in fact his cancer's gotten worse and worse. I thought that was it, but she was like, why didn't you save me? So it's like those are basically his 2 greatest fears kind of combined, because those are 2 important parts of his life that were connected. Like obviously Grace was the nurse that looked after him, but the fact of the matter is, initially before, you know, he got cancer free and they got together, but the fact of the matter is, it's like, here's the woman that you love. Because for him, he was talking to his pals and it was like, yeah, traveling helped him. It's not the best tool for dealing with Grace's death. You can make the argument because you can't tell someone how they're supposed to grieve. So whether he's going about how people deal with grief, they deal with it in various ways, and there's no official rule book on. Someone might try and say, I don't think there's any official rule book on how to deal with grief, you know. I mean, there's like the 12, what was it, like the 5 steps or something like that? No, I think that's the something else. Regardless, you get what I'm trying to say. So it was just an interesting thing. On top of that, the whole thing like being like, okay, so his cancer is always kind of a fear. We'll get to that later on. But the twist is like the doctor's like, oh yeah, I figured this whole situation out. I'm freed the lady, and it's like, oh doctor, you don't realize I've been watching you for a while. I've been watching you stumble. I gave you the breadcrumbs to lead you here. The thing that you didn't ask the right question, and at the moment I was like, the question you should have been asking is why was she imprisoned? And it turns out because she's like Zealand, they're both like this pair of beings that are kind of worshipped as gods. They came to this universe, and in the end, what ended up happening was basically because Zealand had talked about the fact that he takes on this particular form because he finds it so interesting. The fact of the matter is they got bored and they like interfere. Like it's like humans are so unique in what they do. Like the fact is they have their fears, and they're like no one can punish a human more than they can themselves with their own fears and doubts. And that's so it's so delectable to Zealand and his partner in crime. So it's so interesting. Like basically they started wars on the planet because they live so long, they get so bored, so they make this universe their game. And so in particular these two planets that were being used as a means of holding her in a prison, it turns out both planets were being messed with by the gods, because at first it was like, oh, like we have a civil war happening here, and then we eventually like have the entire worlds battling each other, but eventually they caught on. Because the whole point was like, it was a twisted game to see like, oh, who can end up destroying a planet first. I'm like, that's some twist. Once again, it kind of reminds me of the Magicians, how in the Magicians, gods are complete and utter D-bags. It's similar in this case. And it's like, dude, like, man, the Almighty are never painted in a good picture, so that's so interesting. I mean, 'cause once again, these things aren't even gods. They're beings from a different universe that are powerful, that, feed off of fears and stuff like that. And they kind of trick the Doctor into releasing them. And obviously they use a nightmare to try and keep the Doctor in place. But the fact of the matter is, she was able to kind of break free because I guess just the way her mind works. But it seems like it's kind of a buried memory, or more so it is a nightmare, because like her remembering what the Master said, it's a glimpse into that overarching story of like, what is it that the Master's trying to tell her? What does she want? What does the Master want her to see? And I didn't quite 100% understand everything, but it has something to do with the timeless child. It's like they've lied to us, saying that something was a part of us the entire time. So I'm like, have they lied and say like basically all Time Lords that the timeless child has always been a part of them or something? Is that what that's supposed to be? Like obviously it seems like it's something connected to their mythology. Like what I mean in particular is Gallifrey. Maybe it's not even a Gallifreyan thing. Maybe it's specifically a Time Lord thing. It kind of goes hand in hand, but still, I'm curious like what that is about, what this whole timeless child thing is, and what that connection has with the Doctor and the Master. Like, it's kind of like, because he had said it was so ingrained, it was a part of our identities. So that's why I'm wondering, like, are they under the assumption that they're all, children of the timeless child or something like that, or like this, like I'm trying to understand like what that whole thing is. So I'm interested to dive into that. That's my initial thought, but like there's something there. I can't quite piece it together in my head like what that could be. But obviously the Doctor gets free, sets everyone free, and even Ryan had to explain to his mate, literally everything is going down. He's like, this is a prank. He's like, nah man, so it's not that. Obviously our two immortals decide to go to Earth and start feeding off of people's nightmares, and it's like, no, we don't have to like do it all at once. Let's take our time. We could stay here for eternity, kind of messing with this world and feed off of people's nightmares. Because it also turns out the creatures that attack, they were a byproduct of her nightmare. It's like Zealand just ended up bringing them to life. She did all, once again, humans and all that in their creation. So the Doctor's, and I like it when Grandma's like, all right, so Doc, are you going to, figure this whole situation out? And she's like, I have ideas. The problem is trying to figure out which one is the right one. But then she kind of pieces it together. And so obviously they use the creature as a means to kind of signal them. It's like, oh, the creature is calling to us out of time, and it's like, oh, that creature created, oh, our little pet, let's go see it, because it's kind of like, ooh, something so nightmarish created by a human that you brought to life. Oh, I'm so fascinated to see it. But I like the doctor confronting them, being like, you underestimate humans, because they look at humans like, oh, these tiny little insignificant insects, and it's like, you underestimate them. Humans deal with their fears and their doubts on a daily basis. Like, the fact of the matter is, humans are actually amazing because of that. And because of that, Tahira was able to control her nightmare. And it's like, how were you able to do that? It's because she literally faced her nightmare. And that's the beauty of humans. You think that they're just 100% controlled by their fears and doubts. They can get weighed down by them, but when they face them, it's, the beauty of the, human condition of being able to face and triumph over your fears. Like, you think fear is just one side of a human. Obviously, humans are a lot more than that. So look, and I love it. It's like, oh yeah, here's your fingers, huh? And what would she said? Yeah, they did. Glad you were able to give a hand. And Ryan's like, really? And she's like, sorry, I had to. End up trapping them in their own nightmares long enough for you to kind of lock them up. So that was interesting. I wonder, I guess that creature kind of got locked up in there with them, so they're trapped with it for all eternity, so now they just have to put it back. I mean, I guess like all those people from those worlds eventually abandon it, because those worlds are colliding. It seems like they never make a point to visit those worlds, so it's like, I guess like those people on those worlds either sacrifice themselves to keep that immortal imprisoned, or like they abandon the earth after doing that, so they're just stuck in that perpetual state. So it does make, I guess because of the way the prison is set up and everything, like the planets will never actually fully collide, so we don't have to worry about the prison breaking, even though, well, but I'm curious if there's going to be any other like way around that. Like, the doctor figured out how to open the lock. Who's to say someone else won't eventually come along and do that just to be chaotic? We'll see. But yeah, luckily the day was kind of saved. Everyone was saved and kind of returned to the original times. But a lot of really interesting things, because like Ryan's friend kind of has, it seems kind of like a, I don't know whether it's just 100% depression or something, but for him it's like he doesn't get out much. And the fact of the matter is, I guess like things just in his life have kind of kept him down, and he just kind of finds it harder to kind of readjust and get back out there. So he's taking it, Ryan was like, talk to somebody. In the beginning, he wasn't too keen about it, but Ryan kind of convinced him, because he's like, so this is what you've been up to? He's like, yeah. Fact of the matter is, are you going to come back? He's like, yeah. Do you know when? He's like, I don't know when, but he's like, basically don't make it too long. But obviously Ryan's thinking about that because of his nightmare and everything. So, but he was able to kind of get his friend help to kind of like, hey, slowly reach out to people, make a point to kind of talk to people. So I don't know if it's like 100% like an agoraphobia type of situation. It might be. Maybe he kind of developed it. Maybe it's always been like that, but it seems like it's kind of maybe a combination of things, maybe just a little bit of fear and self-doubt on his part, but he's kind of slowly reaching out and finding out like, oh, there's other people out there too. So he's not alone. So there's that. Then we get a little more insight into Yaz's situation, which I thought was pretty neat. Is the fact is, for Yaz, she ran away like 3 years ago. The whole like nightmare she was having is she ran away because she was dealing with so much. The fact is she was being bullied at school. The fact of the matter is she felt like her parents didn't really understand what was going on. So she ran away, and she kind of felt like no one was going to miss me. No one's worried. It's like, your sister is. She called me, and now it makes sense with the whole anniversary thing, because she was like, we don't really have to have this anniversary dinner and stuff like that, but in her own way, that's her sister's way to make sure like, oh no, like keep this appointment so that it's a reminder, but also show like, hey, you're still here. The fact of the matter is like, and that's why her sister, like why it was such a thing for her when it's like, oh, I'm 77 minutes late, because for her, maybe in her sister's mind, it's like, because at least if I know you show up, that means, because I think in her mind, her sister might always be perpetually scared of like, you might run off and leave again or do something stupid, like, her sister loves her, and I think that resonates with Yaz so much that, thinking about that. And that cop reaching out to her, it's like, oh, she's an older lady. So it's like, the fact of the matter is, it's like I have all this wisdom that no one's really going to listen to. Because, yeah, it's like and I love that speech of like, trying to tell Yaz. And it's something, that every, teenager should remember. What you're going through, like, no matter how tough it is, and it's a very important thing, to deal with when it comes to like, anything in life. It's in the moment. Moments pass. Like, how, anyone that might be dealing with a similar situation, that the fact of the matter is, no matter how bad things get, they won't always be that bad, So I that's, and it resonated, it hit, and I was like, And then I like that we are still learning stuff about, because obviously we learned a lot about our characters last season, but it'll be learning even more that something like that happened. Yeah, she was considering running away just because like shit was just that bad. And so I think that's so fascinating. So she was like, all right, I'll make a deal. 3 years, things, you find out like, oh, I'm 100% wrong. Then I pay you 50 quid. But in 3 years, the fact of the matter is, and everything is good, you have to pay me 50 quid. And I think that's so interesting. And now it kind of makes sense why she became a cop, because that cop reached out and helped her. And that put Yaz in a position where she wants to kind of do the same for other people. She wants to do that and she kind of does, just not necessarily as a cop, but I think being a cop kind of helped form her into who she is now. And that allows her to kind of help people on her journey with the doctor and everything. So that's what I kind of like take from it. I thought that was really neat. And even at the end, she goes and visits her, and she's like, you probably don't remember. She's like, you're Yasmin. And it's like, immediately remembers her. It's like, I haven't forgotten. Yaz gives her the 50 quid. And it's like, come inside. It's like, that was beautiful to have that story come full circle like that. And then obviously there's a situation with Graham. Graham hasn't really talked to anyone about his whole nightmarish thing, but it's because for him, he's like, I figure I should talk to somebody. He talks to the doctor because for him, he's like, there's always a part of him that's always been worried. And he's like, the cancer doesn't 100% go away. In particular, the fear, that shadow is always with you in some shape or form. So, it's like, yeah, his test results can say he's clearing everything, but it's always going to be a fear that's looming over your head of like, it could come back, And I love that he's talking to the doctor, and the doctor's not really saying anything. She's kind of nodding her head. I'm like, are we going to find out this is a bit that she's not listening, or she's listening to something else at the same time? And she's like, oh, this is the part where I say something reassuring, right? He was like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, I'm a bit, new, and it's still kind of socially awkward. So she's like, so I'm going to subtly walk over here, and then I'm going to be working, and then like a minute, I'm going to tell you something that I should have told you now. I'm like, wait, what? I was like, what? I guess because the doctor and herself is really dealing with a fear that she's talked to the team about, but she hasn't really dived into like the whole thing. But I guess it's something, because I guess for herself, like she hasn't really figured out how to kind of conquer a fear that's kind of looming over your head. So I guess she really wouldn't know how to really give him the proper advice. But I thought that was such an interesting thing. He's like, good talk, doc. But then, like I said, the Ryan and Yaz thing, because Yaz is like, no, we can always go back to, our lives whenever. But like I brought up earlier, Ryan was like, yeah, but it's like we're living life at two different speeds. Like, yeah, they'll be older and grown, but so will we. We basically been living, it's like, and even Yaz brings up what the doctor said at the beginning, you won't come back the same. And so now, but like I said, that's such an interesting thing, because now it's literally always going to be in the back of Ryan's head. Yaz was kind of like, nah, rolling with the doctor. Like when our time with the doctor is over, the fact that matters, we can come back to our lives. There's so many different things, but you can tell like Yaz is definitely resonating a little bit with what Ryan said. So I think that's always going to be in the back of their minds. Like I think things are shifting. Like after this season, they might not come back. Like you never know. Like because and I thought that was a beautiful. Like to be fair, that happens with every companion. Like something will always happen, and where it's just kind of like, because Martha walked away from this. Obviously her and Mickey got together eventually to do their thing, but different circumstances have led different people like away from the doctor in some shape or form, whether it's by their own choice or whether it's circumstances. Most situations have been circumstances have led the doctor and the companion being torn apart for the purpose of, and very sad reasons. It's not always a good, happy ending when it comes. I think Rose and Martha might be the happiest endings, because everyone else's endings are actually really depressing and sad when you break it down of like why they're no longer traveling with the doctor. And that might be a situation there. And I'm curious to see how they handle that going forward. Like I said, it might not be something immediately, but all of this is rolling in the back of their minds. And the doctor comes over and is like, oh, you get Frankenstein. Was I interrupting something important? She's like, they're like, no. And she's like, oh, okay, good. So it's like, because the doctor, she doesn't like being alone. So it's like, hey, you guys are back. Yeah, now we're in the dark. Let's go. Adventure. Because she doesn't like being alone. Because we see how each of them have kind of handled the whole being alone thing, and what that kind of got rattling in their minds. What gets rattled in the doctor's mind when she's alone doesn't. It's like, I think the quiet can be very sad and dangerous for the doctor. Just where her mind potentially could go, just with everything that she's dealing with. I think traveling with companions kind of gets her mind on other things. It's like, oh, let me show you guys this and that. Because once again, traveling in the TARDIS, it's fun and everything, but it's quite lonely, you know? And I think maybe there's a fear in her that, you know, that, hey, this won't last forever, so, you know, all you can do is hope that it does, you know, but, you know. So I just think those are powerful things to kind of keep in mind with this whole situation. So I am very, very curious to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.